to get away, and the world is just keep watching and not taking serious actions. And the opposite, actually, the Israelis kept to see all like this amount of violations of the international law, the human rights laws. It's very clear that it's violated every day by the Israelis, but nobody almost cares. The opposite, they kept receiving weapons and money and relationships and diplomatic covers.
We have to leave it there. I thank you so much. Look forward to interviewing you and Yuval in the United States. Bassel Adra, co-director of the Oscar-nominated documentary No Other Land.
The viewpoints expressed in this program are the opinions of the people expressing them and are not necessarily those of Fresh Air Incorporated, its staff, or its board of directors.
Hi, this is Al McFarlane, host of the Conversation with Al McFarlane. You're listening to 98.3 FM, KFAI, Minneapolis. I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to the Conversation with Al McFarlane. I'm glad to be here and glad to have you along as well. Today is Tuesday, February 18th, 2025. And as we've been saying for the past several days, we are counting the days into this new administration and into this sort of arena of unbelievability. So interested in knowing what you think about what's happening in our country and how that impacts our community. I'm concerned about what's going to happen with Head Start, for example, here in Minnesota. What's going to happen with health care, businesses and companies that are depending on federal contracts when departments are being dismantled wholesale by the Elon Musk team. What's going to be the impact if you are experiencing any impact? I'd love to hear from you and get a sense of how you assess where we are. And more importantly, what and how and where will the resistance emerge? That's a term I've been hearing lately, the resistance. And I think it's an apropos term because at some point in time, we in community have to show up and to express our belief that what is happening at the federal level at the hands of Donald Trump and the billionaires is not in the interest of democracy, not in the interest of our community, our families, not in the interest of our nation. But at some point in time, we've got to make that decision and make the statement. So, I'd love to invite you to weigh in on the matter. How you can do that today. We're streaming live to YouTube and to Facebook and LinkedIn. If you're on any of those platforms, or if you're listening here on KFAI, go to YouTube Insight News and put a comment in, raise a question. If you want to join the show, we'd love to have you on the show. If you put a comment in and your contact information, we can reach out to you and send you a link. But we'd love to have you in the conversation. Before we get going, I want to start talking about some of the comments that are happening, or stories that are happening in the news today, hot topics. One from the National Newspaper Publishers Association. This is an article published about 4 hours ago by Stacy M. Brown. He's the national editor of the NNPA, National Newspaper Publishers Association, Newswire senior national correspondent. So Brown is writing today that a coalition of civil servants across 9 federal agencies has filed a formal complaint with the Office of Special Counsel, alleging the Trump administration terminated them solely because of their probationary status rather than their performance or conduct. The complaint, the first of its kind, was brought before Special Counsel Hampton Dillinger, who was reinstated to his position by a federal court after Trump attempted to remove him. The filing follows a directive from the U.S. Office of Personnel Management instructing agencies to identify employees without full civil service protections and conduct mass terminations. The complaint states that the suit will eventually cover additional agencies. Open quote, the vast majority of the American people, more than 90%, believe that civil servants should be promoted based on their merit, not on loyalty. Yet the Trump administration is seeking to undermine that value by purging nonpartisan career civil servants and prioritizing partisan loyalists, said Sky Perryman, president and CEO of Democracy Forward, which is representing the terminated employees. He goes on to say, our civil service do everything from keeping our food and medicine safe to securing our borders to improving our communities. We will use all legal tools available to protect them from arbitrary firings designed to politicize our government. Michelle Bercovici, a partner of the Alden Law Group, which joined Democracy Forward in filing the complaint, called the terminations an unprecedented and grossly unfair circumvention of the merit principles upon which our civil service is based. Open quote, she says, these, let's see, I think this is from her. She says, these hardworking employees should have the opportunity to let their work speak for itself. 2 days before the filing of that complaint, the National Federation of Federal Employees, NFFE-IAM, and a coalition of labor unions sued the Trump administration, challenging the legality of the mass firings. The lawsuit, filed in U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia, contests the dismissal of probationary employees, a deferred resignation strategy aimed at pressuring workers to leave voluntarily, and large-scale reductions in force that violate federal statutes. She goes on to say the Trump administration's executive actions to gut the federal workforce are not only illegal, but will also have damaging consequences for federal employees and the public services they provide. She went on to say that the courts must intervene and hold this administration accountable for violating federal laws before it's too late. Federal workers are your friends, she said, and neighbors who have dedicated their careers to serving our country, who cannot let the president disrupt their lives and dismantle critical services relied upon by the American people. I'm reading from an article published a few hours ago at the website of the Black Press of America. The website is called the NNPA Black Press USA News Service. Article written by Stacey M. Brown, who's the NNPA Newswire Senior National Correspondent. I'm going to continue with that and share some other stories from that source as well that I think are appropriate and that address the issue. But before I go on, I want to invite you to join the conversation. If you have comments about this action, other actions that have been taken by our government, and the resistance that must emerge, we want to hear from you. I want to talk about later on a couple other things that are being presented and highlighted by the Black Press of America. One is that former Vice President Kamala Harris will receive the NAACP Chairman's Award at its upcoming 56th NAACP Image Awards. Kudos to them. Kudos to her. And also, I want to just talk about, we all remember, I believe, the documentary called Eyes on the Prize. Well, a new version of that, HBO is presenting Eyes on the Prize 3. And that's going to revisit Black America's modern civil rights struggle. We'll talk about that as well. Again, love to have your voice, your ideas, your concerns in this conversation. And the way you do that is just drop a note to the comment section, or send me a note at Al@Insight News. And if I get that, I'll figure out how to respond to you, invite you to the program. Let me pivot here and invite my guest for the hour to join the conversation. He is Miles Wilson. And Miles Wilson has announced his candidacy to become the city council member representing the neighborhood that I live in, that I've lived in for a long time. That's the 5th Ward of Minneapolis. Miles Wilson, welcome to the Conversation with Al McFarlane. How you doing, buddy?
I'm well. Thank you for having me this afternoon here, Al. It's great to see you.
Great to see you as well. Let's start with Miles Wilson 101. Tell us who you are and where you come from and why you've chosen to present yourself as a candidate for the city council seat for the 5th Ward here in North Minneapolis.
Absolutely. My name is Miles Wilson, born and raised in the 5th Ward, so in North Minneapolis. I'm second generation, to the north side of Minneapolis, starting with my grandparents who came to Minneapolis from St. Louis in the late 60s. But it's an area where, my grandparents raised their kids, so my mom and my aunts and uncle, and then where my mom raised me. And, I've attended school in this area. I've participated in programs, at Hospitality House with the baseball in the spring, PAL football in the fall. I've worked at Teamworks at parks like Harrison Park and Bethune Park. So, I've been around and been involved in this community for so long. And I mean, now even going into my adult life where I'm raising my daughter in the same ward, in the same area, so it's now 4 generations of my family being in this area. And how I came to that decision is, I've kind of seen and heard the response from the community in terms of what they're looking for. I've been involved in an organization with the Unity Community Mediation Team since 2020, and then the Young People's Task Force stemming off of that. And again, just being active in the community. And I want to make sure that I kind of stand on my values that my family has instilled in me, and to continue a legacy that was once started about 80 years ago.
Well, Miles, I think I told you this, your granddad and I were good friends. He was one of my mentors. And
Right.
So this is really kind of interesting to me. In fact, where he lived was 1 block and across the alley from where I live, where I'm sitting right now. So we are connected by geography and by friendship. Ray Island was one of your grandfathers, and he was a good friend of mine, a leader, a pioneer in the era where Black people began to find opportunity both in federal government and in corporations. And I think he left a job at EEOC where he had been a leader and went to the corporate world at the Pillsbury Company and did wonderful work there, opening doors and also being a steward of civic and community organizations, neighborhood organizations in North Minneapolis and in Twin Cities. And so legacy is important to me. And as you think about taking the mantle of leadership in this neighborhood, what does legacy mean to you? You've described it a little bit, but I want you to go deeper with that. Reflect on who your grandparents were and tell their stories and how those stories pour into your decision to seek office in Minnesota today.
Absolutely. I mean, legacy. Well, I'll start with this is that, as you mentioned, my grandfather, Ray Island, my grandmother, Doris Island. As I kind of mentioned already, I mean, coming to Minneapolis from St. Louis in the late 60s, for me personally, I tell the story this way is that my grandparents were just like that. I would assume for anybody else and their grandparents. That was my grandpa and my grandma. And at the time when, I was growing up, spending time with them, I didn't see them through this light that I'm now finding out more about. And it's very inspiring and motivational, as I talk to residents who are still living in the ward and they're telling me the stories. I from time to time I would hear stories from my Uncle David or my Aunt Kathy or my Aunt Elaine or my mom, where they would kind of talk about things that would happen or even be reminded if I tell them a story that I've heard from the community, and so I would say that, in terms of that legacy piece where, I'm continuing to do the work, I'll as a child, I don't know if a child has a dream of being, carrying on a legacy that they may or may not know about. And for me, I feel like there's just been a spirit that's guided me, where for me, as I've gotten further in the light of community work, community organizing, youth work, equity work, where we're talking about inclusion and bringing up our community. And I'm hearing these stories about my grandfather in terms of what he's done at, Pillsbury, or being appointed the commissioner of I think, affirmative action, if I'm not mistaken. But those kind of things, like, I wouldn't have known without the community support. But at the same time, these weren't things that him and I have talked about. So it's more of like a motivational push where I feel a spirit that kind of guides me, and it feels like a natural step into a natural light.
Describe the community then that you see now, that you've grown up in. What are the assets of our community, and what are the liabilities? And how do you think your leadership will improve, enhance the quality of life for the residents of Fifth Ward, but for the entire community? What's motivating you?
Absolutely. So in terms of the asset, the first thing I think about is connection. And that starts first with how connected the people of this ward are. My family's not the only family that's been around for 2 or 3 or even more generations. And there's a lot of families that are embedded with their roots in this community, in this ward, in this area. And that shows when you sit and talk to people and you find out connections. Oh, hey, you're related to this person, you're related to that person. And you find out the ties that happened even from my mom's generation or beyond that for me. But also another asset is being connected to the metro of Minneapolis. We're so close to downtown Minneapolis. We're 5 minutes away. Anytime I leave my house and go anywhere, I'm pretty much 5 to 10 minutes away from any which direction I need to go in. Mm-hmm. And that's a big asset in itself. It's to understand the geographical location of where we're at and how we're positioned to thrive. Now, the other side of that, the liability is understanding that and developing upon that and developing within our community. It's home ownership, public safety, economic development. Let's bring in, our people and continue to build on what we already have as a foundation, but also building upon that so that our people can thrive and survive. And like I mentioned, the equity aspect of giving our people the chance, the resources to be successful within this area, to be our Ward 5 in North Minneapolis, I look at as a blank canvas, as an area of opportunity to grow and build from a foundational level. And so part of my candidacy stands on 3 key pillars. It's constituent services, where we're talking about not just from a concerns perspective of hearing the voice of the community, but also including the community to impact the community by sharing their vision and ideas from our young people, which I've mentioned that that I've worked with, to our elders, to our various and diverse groups of people that live within the ward, sharing those ideas of what you want to see from the ward. What do you like to have within the ward? So that's the first aspect. The second aspect is public safety. As long as people feel safe where they live, they feel like they're able to accomplish many things. They're able to get beyond the bare necessities of survival of breathing, water, food. We can start getting to these higher ups on our pillars of being able to be creative with our thoughts, being able to enjoy and relax and enjoy our space. And so with those 2 details, those are things that I stand on from a candidacy perspective, and also the Metro Transit Blue Line. That last aspect is there's projected, for those that may or may not know, there's a projected plan for the Blue Line to come through North Minneapolis, specifically through Ward 5. And to that, my thoughts on that are is that, again, I like the aspect of equities. It is connecting, again, our community to resources such as the airport on a much more efficient process, connecting our community to downtown Minneapolis, to the suburbs, to the mall. That's where people tend to spend their time. But what I want to make sure is that the community is included in this conversation so that we can hear the true voice of the community, figure out even suggestive of maybe even alternative options. If the light rail isn't something the community wants, maybe it's a rapid bus line that follows the same pathway where or maybe it's putting the light rail above ground so that you don't affect maybe homes. So it's all about being inclusive. It's all about being attentive, listening, taking action, and following through. I would also like to mention that that I've stand on the values, like I mentioned, that my family has instilled in me with the honesty, transparency, and accountability. And I think that those actions need to be, or those values need to be a part of my candidacy in order to make sure that this community thrives beyond where we've been before.
For background, tell people about the person who's sitting at the Fifth Ward seat right now. His decision to not run, his announcement that he'd not seek re-election is what I believe motivated you. Maybe you would have run either way. I don't know. I mean, you tell us. Were you in a position to decide that you would run regardless of whether or not the incumbent remained or departed? But talk about the incumbent and how his decision influenced you one way or the other.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, so for me, my decision to run was totally set in stone, before the decision for the incumbent Jeremiah to not run or decide to not run again. That was just based on the confidence in me again, and kind of going back to that legacy piece, knowing my history within the ward, knowing the history in the motivation and the encouragement that was kind of instilled in me from the community based on myself as a person, but also from my connections to this community as well. So that, I mean, my decision to run was, again, solely based on just the confidence I have within myself. Now the incumbent, Jeremiah Ellison, currently sits as a city council member for Ward 5. And he decided not to run, I believe, in October is when he announced that he would not run. And so, yeah, and I look to kind of pick up from what I've been hearing from the community, again, from that constituent services side, is making sure that, myself as a candidate and as a city council person is responsive, is taking action, is following through, is listening, and is taking in those concerns from the people, is making sure, again, I care about this area. Again, this is where now my daughter is being raised. I was raised here. My mother was raised here. My aunts, my uncles were raised there. So again, it's something that holds true to me, where the entire ward, the entire area, they're not just neighbors, but a lot of them are family. A lot of them are friends. A lot of them are, peers, whether I went to school with them, whether that I was, taken care of as a child by some of my neighbors, that part of community is something that I grew up, being able to be blessed with experiencing, is knowing that my parents could call on a neighbor and say, hey, my kids get home from school at 1:30. We get out for work at 5:30. Can you just make sure that they're okay? And give us a call to check in. Is bringing that aspect back to an area that's already close knit. So,
Sean Lewis just sent a post from Facebook quoting something that I think he pulled from United Way, but something that's worth having your comments on. The note here, I'll post it, says that equity, by definition, is the quality of being fair and impartial. Equality is a state of being equal, especially in status, rights, and opportunities. He quotes that, I think, from the United Way, a blog on equity versus equality. So let me ask you, in this era of the dismantling of DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, what are your thoughts about that? Has the DEI train run its course, or is there value in pursuing and defending DEI, or are there other strategies that we should be looking at? Or finally, is this an either or crossroads? Are there many ways to move forward as community towards development and towards the principles of equality, the principle of inclusion, and the principle of diversity. What are your thoughts about the general discussion about DE&I right now?
That's a great question. I mean, my thoughts on that is that I absolutely support DEI initiatives in the plan of action behind that. I do think that there's value, absolutely 100% in diversity, equity, and inclusion. Why? I mean, those three words alone, diversity, diversifying workforces, diversifying how funds are being spent and allocated, diversifying areas and opportunities, equity, as mentioned, it's a great point to be brought up because about a year ago, I hosted a seminar session at Breck School, actually, where I talked to the students about equity and their thoughts on that versus the word equality. And the thing about it is equality, people, and I don't think it comes from, our community, but I think that overall the word equality is the word that people tend to latch onto because it just means the same. But in reality, our situations are not the same. Our opportunities are not the same. And that's why equity is so important, because it is going back to our community. The equity side of it is, one, we're starting 400 years behind, and so every generation, I'm sure that a lot of people can contest this and say that, maybe like my grandfather, again, going back to that legacy piece, is that when my grandfather passed away, we weren't left with an abundance of money. And I'm not saying it's all about money or property or anything like that, but each generation had to start over and rebuild that. And that's why the equity piece is so important, is because that is allowing us to have a fighting chance in the workspaces. And somebody who's worked in corporate America, where, I know that opportunities may not be the easiest for us. That's why DEI was so important. When we're talking about home ownership or getting grants and loans, we have to, as a community, adjust so many times and figure out other ways of getting things done. That's what makes DEI so important. And then in the inclusion piece, of course, is just that, within the word inclusive, being inclusive. We're making sure that, everybody's being heard, everybody's voice is being, mentioned or allowed to have a voice, so I don't believe in silencing people. I don't believe in, shushing people. I believe in giving everybody that opportunity to speak about their experience, because they're all different, and that's the beauty in being open-minded. That's the beauty of being a person that is willing to work with all areas and being able to communicate with all different people. Now, to the second part of that question, is it time for something different? I don't think that it's time for something different, but as we've done so many times in the history of our community and the history of our people, is that, pivoting, adjusting. How do we now create something that's advancing DEI? And that's, again, going back into those conversations where we're sitting down at the table with people of all different backgrounds, all different experiences in life, all different current situations in life, and having that discussion of talking about, hey, okay, can we enhance processes and initiatives like DEI? Can we adjust it? Can we be flexible and work to recreate it? So I believe that, I'm always about innovation, being creative and thinking outside that box. And so I think that there's an opportunity for that now that it's being overturned. I think there's an opportunity to be recreated to further serve our people.
I'm Al McFarlane. This is the Conversation with Al McFarlane. My guest today is Miles Wilson. Miles Wilson's Northsider here in Minneapolis, and he's announced his candidacy for the city council seat for Ward 5 that he lives in, that I live in, where we're hosting the show from, as a matter of fact. Miles, thank you for being here. And again, if you have questions or comments, you can do two things. One, drop them in the comment section if you're monitoring this show on Facebook or YouTube. We appreciate your questions, your presence, your sharing this conversation out. But you could also send an email to me. I'm going to put, I'll read the email. The email is mcfarlanemedia@gmail. And if you got a comment that you want to share, if you're not online, but you want to send something in, send me an email directly to mcfarlanemedia@gmail. We'll bring you into the conversation. Miles, let's talk about the current political environment. I mean, several things. Before we finish today, I want to go back to police community relations.
Yeah.
Just think about it right now. I want to go back to the work of the Young People's Task Force and of the Unity Community mediation team. You've been a part of that. And I also want to go to your own personal educational and professional career, what things you've done professionally, educationally to prepare you to be a leader in our community. So those are general things. Think about them, and we'll come back to them and weave them into the conversation. I want to also talk about how old you are. I didn't ask you that, but
Yes.
I'm pleased to see young people step up. That's the point of asking. So you can talk about how you present yourself here as a representative of the new generation, a new generation. And one of the things I heard you say when you talked about wealth, you didn't use these words, but I'll have you respond to them. In our community, we're talking about generational wealth. You mentioned the fact that, when your grandpa and grandma were here, they did a great job of giving you values, but they didn't leave you a whole bag of money. And so the question is, and it's not that we're motivated by money, but we have to be practical in this world. And there is room for, and it's appropriate to have a discussion about creating generational wealth for our community. It's a priority, I believe, and that's why we support business creation, supporting movement in the professional arena and other ways we can generate wealth for our families and for our community that's intergenerational by design. So we'll come back to all those things in the next few minutes. Let me ask you to speak to the moment. I opened the show talking about what I think is the catastrophe of governance that our country is facing. As a young person, how do you read what's happening in the country? How do you read the direction the country is going in under the leadership of President President Trump?
Yes. So the direction, it's well, first and foremost, that's our president, and I think that we can combat that by a few things. I think that we can combat that by education. I'm big on self-education. I mean, there's a lot of resources out there today, whether it's on the internet through platforms like YouTube, and just learning about how government and politics works in terms of a higher level. And then, again, just jumping in the conversation, I think that we need to, as a country, unify and slow things down and simplify a lot of these processes, because I think that a lot of things get overlooked or maybe not even understood. I think there's a lot of people that spread, misinformation, because at the same time of having access to a lot of information, there's a lot of ways that people can just spread information, whatever they want to spread. And so I think that's important for us to do our research on things, to figure out what's actually going on at the government level, at the top levels, and then again having these conversations. Now, the second side of that is taking back control. Taking back. I mean, it's very important to vote, and I know that that's something that whether it's a local election, whether it's a state election, whether it's a presidential election, House of Senate, House of Representatives, understand and really participate in these conversations. Reach out to your representatives of your different areas. Reach out to and just have these conversations. Just last Thursday, I participated in and sat in on Senator Bobby Joe Champion's town hall, and it was a great informational session that spoke to things about the budgets. And it's like now we're understanding, where things are at, and I think that's important to not only be there, but if you can't be there, just connect with people that have been, or I think it's our duty as, as citizens to share the information that we have. So I think that the current state of it is that right now it is what it is. And it's going to be 4 years of that unless he gets impeached and removed out of office. But under that, we can still make change by working on our local politics. We can make change by involving ourselves in conversations, and we can engage by, just connecting with one another.
So Miles, how old are you?
I'm 30 years old. I turned 30 in November.
Well, okay. Well, happy belated birthday or happy early birthday. Either way you want a happier birthday, however you want to do it. And so, again, I'm impressed that you stepped forward. And I want you to speak to the voice of young people. What are you hearing that oldsters like Al McFarlane need to pay attention to more than we have in the past? What is your sense of whether or not we've been effective and properly connected so that our movement towards freedom is genuinely intergenerational, so that we don't find ourselves saying, we're victims of the Willie Lynch system, old people against the young people? How do we avoid that? How do you look at that? How do you look at the people that followed, that both preceded you, your peers, and those who are following you? What's your thought?
The first thing that comes to mind is that, I feel like now is the time. As I mentioned, I knew kind of earlier in 2024 that I was going to run for office. But I've considered it in the last two elections prior. At the time, I didn't feel quite ready. I mean, as a father, my daughter's 5 now, and she would have been 1, 2, and 3-ish, or 1 and 3. But in that same breath, I feel really present, and I feel really like the time is right now because of, as you mentioned, as my age, I think that there is sometimes a disconnect between the generation beneath me and the generation above me. And I feel like a bridging gap, so somebody that can connect with the young people and someone who still listens and is able to understand from the generations before me. And I say that with full respect to all sides. I think that there is that grounds of my generation who understands how to communicate through different ways. For example, I know that the younger generation follows a lot of their information, a lot of their news through social media. Mm-hmm. I know that I support a lot of my elders in my family with their social media usage and how to operate things, the technology side. I grew up in an era where about halfway through my school time, from kindergarten through 12th grade, about halfway is when things started to really switch to a digital side of things. I do remember in elementary school and middle school where we were, doing a book report. And at the time we were going to the library to find 3 or 4 sources of actual physical books and 1 internet source. Nowadays, that switch where you find 3 or 4 sources on the internet and maybe 1 book source. And so I've watched things change in my life, and that kind of gives me the bandwidth to be able to connect with both sides. Now, what I'm hearing from the young people, are places of sanctity, safe spaces. They want places that they can go to in their community. They want places that they can, hang out with their friends and have resources, and it's very selfless of them. From some of the things I've heard of, things that they want more pharmacies and access for their elders to be able to get their medication much closer to home. I've heard about, having resources for, better food options. They want local markets, and they want better produce in their grocery stores. They want, like I mentioned, a safe space where they can go to study outside of their home if their home is maybe crowded, or they want resource centers, places that help them, elevate within their own space. I've talked to a lot of young people who are excited about tech, and want to do coding and things like that. But where can they go to go do that? So creating these spaces for them. And I think that that's where they're at. They want public safety, where they can feel safe walking from their house to school or from their friend's house or to the park. They want, these details in the city, and they're very advanced. They're very intelligent, and they know exactly what they want, just like all of the generations before them also, knew. It's just a matter of, helping them get these voices, get these visions, get these ideas out, and helping them bring them to life and showing them the way. I sometimes, they feel where they are trying to voice these ideas and these concerns, but they feel unheard. So that's where I take it upon myself to say, hey, that's where the Young People's Task Force kind of became created, was like, let's sit down, let's talk to them, let's figure some things out and figure out how we make things happen together. And so a lot of things I've learned on that process, and I was happy that, I helped other young people have access and do some of those things as well.
When I grew up, Miles, a sentiment of my age group was kind of always distrustful and skeptical and kind of anti-establishment, anti-police. And we felt that the police were an occupying force and that they did not have the interest of our community or our culture, of our people, that in fact, they were there to suppress and to support systems that denigrated our humanity. And that simply, was also a consequence of the facts of our existence. And it's a reflection of the legacy of enslavement, of colonialism, imperialism that we experienced. I think things are changed. They're changing. And I'd be interested in how you perceive the stories that we have told, and how you, at the same time, as a person who has access to the world differently because of digital technology. Mm-hmm. You just described it a second ago. You have the availability of information from all over the world and many sources. We didn't have it the same way you have it now. And so what's the change? The narrative that we had, and what is the narrative that we must have going forward that will reflect substantive change or reflect the success of our movement towards freedom? What does freedom mean to you and mean to us?
That's a great question. First, to answer that, as we heard stories, about things like, even kind of going back to that legacy piece, there were stories about my grandfather that, in terms of physically, like, standing in front and trying to, have the opportunity to speak at places like the Capitol, and then to be attacked by, members that, were coming off from, again, the KKK is from the stories that I've heard. That's not something that I get. That's something that I get when I hear stories like that. First and foremost, you honor the fight that's happened, and then you go all the way back. Again, go back 400 years ago. You go all the way back, and I don't think that the fight has changed. I think about how, again, kind of going back to that equity piece as well. That's kind of what I was saying about that too. Is it's always we've always had to adjust and pivot to the times that we were in. You know what I mean? So nowadays, as we talked about, the technology piece is knowing that the world is in our hands, knowing that the way that people move around are different, knowing the way that people are sharing information is different. I think that's kind of the space that we're in terms of, making change. And we saw, in 2020, how impactful that was. There was a revolution right here in Minneapolis. The world had the world. I think about that often. We're talking about a time when we were in the middle of a pandemic. There were quarantine, orders. There were mandated staying at home orders, not to leave the house. I mean, people were legitimately in their homes trying to make sure that they stay safe because we didn't really understand, the grasp of what COVID-19 was looking like. And then in the midst of that, we watched live through social media first the murder of George Floyd. And that was something that the world saw at the same live, you know what I mean? And so, and the young people did exactly what we've seen young people do in past generations. I mean, got out, protested. Now there was other things that took place, but I want to focus on the protest aspect of it because that the voice was there. And that's what the world was tuned into is what is Minneapolis talking about? What is Minneapolis going to do? I think that, again, it's in that same breath with technology. I mean, we're seeing now things that we haven't seen in the past. We're seeing body cam footage from officers, and that's being released, to showcase what's happening. So I think that we're in a space of fighting, a digital war, and I think that the young people are using their voice, spreading that awareness of how they feel, and I think that's so. And I think that freedom becomes an aspect of again exercising that right to have a voice, to speak it, and to continue to push it, because as that happens, now we're talking about going back to, again, those values that I have that I'm starting to see is the accountability, the transparency, and the honesty. There's no more we've heard the stories of, or we've seen the blurry camera footage where we couldn't really discern what was happening in the incident, and that was able to get brushed aside in the past. There's no more, this person just ended up. I mean, even I just watched a documentary about a month ago. It was an Emmett Till documentary, and I, of course, knew the story, but I've never seen it or from that perspective. But again, it was all based on an accusation. That doesn't work today. Everything is being documented, everything is being filmed, and you're always, liable to have to hold yourself to that honest situation, be transparent about it, and we're going to hold you accountable for it.
You use the term digital war. What do you mean?
A digital war, I mean that by that is that, that we're in a space of everything. Like I kind of just mentioned, the last excerpt of what I just said is everything's being documented, and that's the way that we're getting things out. I think that in the past, kind of going back to what was happening then versus what's happening now, is that a lot of people relied on, the news, like just a broadcasting 9 p.m. news broadcast, and even using 2020 for example, seeing it live time what was happening and people being enraged in the moment versus waiting till 10 o'clock p.m. at night to say, well, this happened and we don't really know what happened behind it. More story, breaking news, or more information to come. We were able to see that now. So that when I say like the digital war, I say that from an aspect of things are being pressed live. Even this conversation, we're live having that conversation. So it's just things are happening in the moment nowadays than, in the past.
And so what does it mean then in terms of our ability to imagine a different future? The technology exists. We have our hands on it. We are creating through the technology, and we are creating technology itself. What does that mean for the future, for our people? And I always say, Brother Miles, that what happens and what we do, in my mind, for our people, we do for humanity. That's how I see it. You may or may not see it the same way. But
Right.
as the technology continues, how do we engage it in ways that advance our sense of what it means to be a decent human being, that affords every human being an opportunity to pursue her or his best self? What do you think?
Yeah, I think that with, technology, especially with where it's going, in terms of AI and, this advancement of creating almost like a digital presence. I think that first and foremost that, it's important for us to stay in these conversations, stay up with what's going on. I think that's the first and foremost, important piece of that. I think that, but that also starts with, the equity side of it, because if we're giving our young people the opportunity to feel safe, to have, resources, then they can focus on the things that they want to do. I've heard so many times, from young people that they're interested in tech, in coding, in building programs. And I think that, that those minds, once they are able to get beyond the basics of survival, then they're able to thrive. And that's where I believe that, the future is going, as long as we continue to, kind of wrap our arms as a community, as a people around our young people, and protect them and support them, that we're going to continue to advance and build that better sense of self.
I put on the screen another comment by our friend Sean Lewis. He says, Miles, how do we make community assets, for example, schools and parks and business development organizations like Neon, better serve Northsiders? For example, North High School has a new career and technical center. The Minneapolis Public Schools is building a state-of-the-art center and technical education center at North High that will allow students from across the city to get hands-on experience in engineering, robotics, drones, and media arts. So the question is, how do we elevate that, escalate it, and make sure that we become the seat of it as opposed to an afterthought in it? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, the first thought that comes to mind is we have to touch base with the families. We have to get involved and share this information with the families. And I'll speak from my experience. In high school, there was a program, and this program is still around now. I've just touched base with them not that long ago, but it's the Minneapolis Youth Congress. That wasn't a program that I necessarily, they may have shared, flyers throughout school, but I didn't see those. I was, if it wasn't about sports, about books and school, or then in my free leisure time or work, and then in my leisure time, my friends, then I didn't really see, too much activity going on. But how I got involved in that program, and I was really thankful that I did, was based on my community support system. We have to share these resources, with the families that are in our area, that let them know what's going on. And kind of like I mentioned before, with allowing our young people to be young people first. There's a lot of times that, from working directly with young people, that at times they become the head of the household. Sometimes they have a parent that works 2 jobs, and they're the ones that feed their younger siblings. They're the ones that, helps them with their homework. They're the one, they become a parent at such a young age, and we're forcing them to grow up so fast. I think that's where our community becomes a community again. Like I mentioned earlier in this conversation about having neighbors who my parents could rely on to say, hey, the kids are at home after school, and can you just check in on them? We had the connection with our neighbors, and that's important because we had the connection with our neighbors where we knew that, hey, we had like after school snacks, but we weren't allowed to use the stove. Mm-hmm. And, but my neighbors would have actual meals for us, so they took the pressure up. And me being I'm the second oldest, but my older sister, she lived with her mom, but so at the time I was the oldest in the house. That took the pressure off of me of having to be the head of the household. Yes, I was the primary, or I would say the leader of the pack. But at the same time, I didn't have the responsibility of making sure that that my younger sisters were, fed, taken care of, bathed, put to sleep. I just had the responsibility of just making sure that if something went wrong, I was the primary person to pick up the phone, call the neighbors, or call my parents, things like that. So I think that first part is encouraging the families, get in touch with the mother, the guardians, the fathers, the family, the grandmothers, aunts and uncles, and sharing this information with them first, and then encouraging the push, and find out what these kids are interested in. Because, once we get them back into the space of being a kid again, or being a young person again, then they're able to, like I mentioned before, get into these spaces and thrive and really just focus on themselves and building themselves up.
I'm Al McFarlane. This is The Conversation with Al McFarlane. My guest is Miles Wilson. Miles is a Northsider who's declared his intention to be the next city council representative for the 5th Ward in North Minneapolis. He's talking about his legacy of leadership, of family, and about his intention as a young person. Miles, your schooling, you mentioned high school. Talk about the rest of your education career and your work career, how those things fold into your preparedness for public office.
Yeah. So I went to Minnesota State University, Mankato, where there I studied business. I came back to Minneapolis after that. That was about 2017, where at that time I was working for Delta Airlines for a little bit, and at that time I just took that opportunity to travel. So I didn't go into Delta as for a career position. I went there just to be a ramp agent, where I was able to, like I said, just taking some time to travel and explore the world, and that really opened my eyes to different experiences, different cultures, different people. And
where did you go? Tell me about it.
Yeah, so I traveled to Japan, Thailand, London, France, just about every island in the Caribbean for true vacations. The Central America, such as Costa Rica, place. I think there might be others. Those are the ones that really come to mind for, there were those.
And so what did you discover? I mean, traveling like that, when you're a person who's under 30 years old, traveling, probably you were under 24 or 5 at the time, right? When you were traveling?
I was about 22.
22. So what's it like to be a 22-year-old in Thailand or in Japan? What are you learning? What are you discovering? And how do you put together that experience with the experience you have in London or in Paris to give you an understanding about human beings? What discoveries do you think inform the person you are today?
So, that's a great question. The first thing is that the first part of that was solo traveling. It was, that was at 22, you're excited to do these things. You feel like you're invincible. There was nothing that could stop me. My parents could tell you that I would wake up one day and just jump on a flight to go anywhere. Mm-hmm. But with that said, what that really did was that that pushed me outside my comfort zone. That's where you're really tasked and challenged with how open-minded are you to new foods, to new cultures, to new ways of thinking, new ways of life. But what you come to find out is that a lot of people are very similar in terms of being open-minded, in terms of being, culturally aware, of being geographically aware. Like laws aren't the same in other countries like they are in America. Ways of life isn't the same necessarily as they are in the U.S. But at the same time, you find that a lot of people are willing and open to connecting. I'll tell a story is that when I was in France, I was at the Eiffel Tower and I was by myself and, I was kind of just wandering and I came across this family that was from Italy, but they extended an invite where they opened up their restaurant their day off to just, make me their dishes. And again, it was very different because it was, they were, it wasn't different because they were welcoming. It was different because I didn't expect that. I didn't think that that's what that side of the world had to offer. And so there was experiences like that all over the place, in Thailand, the people, they spoke really well English. I was not aware that was what was going to happen, but then I started to realize that that's who they wanted to connect with was Americans. So, but yeah, I think that during that time, that was, kind of the setting stone for, how I approached people was just, being open-minded, taking the experiences of saying, well, this is how they do operate on the other side of the world, and just kind of utilizing that and projecting that out into the world as I was, kind of finding my mold. But after that Delta experienced, that's when I went to go work for Voya Financial. That was shortly after I had my daughter. It was about time that I've kind of set into my career path. And that's where I was a contract analyst, where I wrote life insurance policies. And that was for the employer benefit side. So a lot of life insurance policies, short-term, long-term disability, and supplemental health benefits. And I spent time there engaging in different resource groups. I led a webinar on financial literacy. And so I really kind of looked to push the envelope of DEI within my time at Voya Financial.
Miles, we're out of time. Listen, this has been a wonderful conversation. It won't be the last. I want to hear more about your campaign as it unfolds, and about your story, and about the legacy that you represent, the business you're standing on. Thank you so much for being here today. I'm Al McFarlane. This is The Conversation with Al McFarlane. We'll see you next time.